done? I would ask him if he would guide me along this, and then he offered to be my mentor at that point, and then of course I said yes, because that was the question I needed to pop, but I didn't know exactly how to say it. So my final product, I did basically surgery on an animation patient who had a nasal defect from having basal cell carcinoma or squamous cell carcinoma or a malignant melanoma, that they had this giant defect in their nasal cavity and area, and so I would perform a forehead flap nasal reconstruction on the patient. A little background information: forehead flap nasal reconstruction is a technique used by multiple plastic surgeons to recreate the nose after trauma caused by different reasons. It has been proven to be one of the most reliable, as well as provide aesthetically pleasing results. There are multiple different techniques that many different surgeons can use. This also sprung an interest because I was so interested in the different type of techniques, and the forehead flap technique is really different to look at. You wouldn't expect someone walking around the way that they do in the middle of the forehead flap nasal reconstruction, but it provides one of the best results. So this was step one. There's 3-step and 2-step forehead flap nasal reconstructions. 2-step, during this I'll show you can cut out the middle step kind of, but during the for my specific patient, I decided that I wanted her to have a 3-step. For step one, what you would do initially, these are the 2 animations that I got. This animation student had multiple other priorities, so he cannot continue along with me, but this animation student was able to comply with all my needs and wants of the animation, a very time-consuming animation, and I thank her for it. So what would happen is you would cut the defect, oh there it is, you would cut the defect more geometric and the nasal subunit borders. Your nose is cut up into different subunits, and there's something called a subunit principle, and it's proven that in the subunit principle, if you have a scar lying on one of the outlines of the subunit, then the scar is less noticeable. And so if you can cut it more geometric and kind of make it more round and not so finger-like, then you'll have better results. And then after you make it more geometric, you'll create a template. For the template, you'll use something like foil, something that's very malleable, that you can mold to the patient's little defect right there, and you'll be able to make the exact size, the exact shape of the defect. Once you have the exact size and the exact shape of the defect, what you will do is you'll grab something like gauze, and you'll place it right below the eyebrow right there on the side of the defect. If you cut the patient, if you divide the patient through the middle, down the center, you want to make sure that you keep the forehead flap on the same side. So for this particular patient, you would want it on that side, and for this particular patient, you would want to keep it on this side. So you would create a template, you would grab the gauze, you'd place it right there, and then you would make sure that it's long enough, and you would just basically round it about there, and you'll bring it up there. You would have the scar, and you would basically map out your template. Same goes with this patient. And at this point, then you would excise the skin flap. What's so important about the skin flap is that there is a vein that goes through your forehead like so. No, it's an artery. There's an artery that goes through your forehead like so, and that creates an adamant amount of blood supply to the pedicle, which is also the forehead flap. And that you want to make sure that it has enough blood supply, and so the flap doesn't become necrotic, and then you have to start over, and then there's a bunch of different problems, and you just don't want to deal with it. So you excise the skin flap. You're very, very careful. You start pretty subdermally, and then once you get past where you would have the defect, you go submuscularly, and you go further down and deepen. Once you excise the skin flap, you place it carefully where it lays perfectly upon the defect. So you would just rotate it just like so, and then you would lay it perfectly on the defect. You would close it with sutures. You place the sutures very, very carefully on the pedicle on top of the nasal defect. You make sure that capillary refill is perfectly fine. You don't want any necrosis happening. When you close up the forehead suture, what you will do is you'll kind of like grab under it and you kind of like loosen it up a little bit so you're able to close it, because you do have like a gaping hole, and so you need to like be able to like loosen up the skin and put it closer together. And if you're not able to, you kind of just do it as closely as possible, and then you leave a little bit open and you warn the patient to be very careful. So this is basically post-step 1. This is what you would see after the post-op from the patient. You would see that they have this scar right here, and then you have the flap right here that was up here, who is now rotated down here, and which covers the defect. Step 2. This is about 3 to 4 weeks later. This is also the part where a lot of surgeons will cut out, but this is what my mentor and I believe that this is very important. This makes the surgery more stable. You have a better outcome. It's more safe. It does take more time because there's 3 surgeries instead of 2, and it's 3 weeks later. But you do have better results. So it also depends on the patient's compliant. But in my opinion, I believe that it will be worth it. And so what you'll do, you'll lift up the skin flap right here. You'll lift it basically up a little bit. You'll thin out the flap as much as possible. You'll kind of make sure that it's not too thick. Normally, when you first lay it down, it's kind of pudgy looking and stuff like that. And so what you'll do, you'll thin it out, and you make sure that it lies pretty flat on the nose. And then you place it back down and you close them back up. And so you've already thinned it out. You kind of made it look like the way you want it to, but it's still attached to the forehead right here, which means that you'll have just amount of blood supply, and it's already started to take in blood supply from the nose. Insert picture here. Insert picture 2. In step 3, this would be the last of the 3. This would also happen 3 to 4 weeks after the second surgery. You would just resect the middle portion of the flap. You don't have to do any thinning out or anything like that because you've already thinned it out the way that you want it to. So you just resect the middle portion of the flap, and you would come out with the last part of the patient. This is from start to finish. This will be a lot better when I have pictures to explain it. But you'll be able to start out with the patient with a nasal defect protruding from their nose, and you'll go through all the steps, and at the very end, you'll be able to have a patient who no longer has a nasal defect, and they just have a scar on their forehead that shouldn't show very much if your surgeon's skilled the way that they should be. And so you'll look like brand new. So what I plan to do in the future, over the summer I will be working with Dr. Thornton and a team of medical students and fellows. I was able to get a non-paid internship at UT Southwestern with him, and I'll be working with him and doing a lot of different research over nasal subunits and the subunit principle. And also in the fall, I will be attending Texas A&M in the fall to study biomedical engineering and pre-medicine. So gig 'em. Does anybody have any questions? Coach Goff? Ask your hardest question, because my friend already told me that she was going to ask me like super hard questions. I'm like, no.
On the nose surgery, how deep is the wound that they create?
At which part?
I mean, is there a minimum depth, maximum depth?
Not really. You just make sure that you don't go past hitting the skull. You want to make sure that you have enough blood supply, and so you don't want to go too subcutaneously. You want to go deep down where you're able to get as much blood supply as possible. So thank you all for coming to my final presentation. It's been a joy to speak with you about my journey this whole year, and I hope you had a great time, and I also hope you have a great drive home. That was